Hello everyone, my name is Sarah Stevens. I am an intern here at Community Renewal. As many of you know, we here at Community Renewal, we're planning on having a WeCare workshop series. We've been getting a lot of great questions from the WeCare team about how to care more in our communities and reach out with our own time, and we want to answer those. Unfortunately, things did not go as planned, so the first workshop's going to look a little different. There's been a lot of cancellations due to the spread of COVID-19, the coronavirus, and many people are rightfully concerned, and we want to respect that. We believe, however, it's probably more important now than ever to not put aside talking about social isolation, which was going to be our first topic, because of this necessary time of social isolation. We were just going to move back the workshop, originally reschedule, but we've decided to move it online instead so that you can have this information now, as you're more likely to need it now than after all of this goes down. So we will be doing a series of 3 episodes related to social isolation. The first one, this one, is going to be discussing what it is, what types of effects it has on the individuals and the community at large. The second episode, we're going to talk about what social circles are and what it takes to be socially healthy. The final episode, the third episode, we're going to talk about some suggestions of what you could change or look at in your own life to maintain the social health now, as well as after we return back to normal and kind of figuring out that transition back to everyday life. Okay, so let's jump right into it. What is social isolation? Simply put, people need to interact with other people to be healthy, and we need those in specific amounts. And that varies a little bit per person, but when we don't receive social interaction in the amounts that we need, then we are considered socially isolated and potentially cut off from other people in society. Not everyone is aware of when we are affected by this. There are countless times where you could be socially isolated and not actually feel lonely and not feel as much the need for more social interaction than you're already getting. This makes sense though, because that's like other things in our life. We should be getting 6 to 8 glasses of water every day. But if you're only getting about 3 or 4 and you're not particularly active, you probably won't feel thirsty that day. Our bodies would still do a lot better though if we had all 6 glasses, and it does have an effect on our health. So social isolation and our social health is a little bit like that. I would like to make the distinction between social isolation and just being alone. Being alone regularly can be good for people. I know the introverts feel that. I know I do, but also extroverts. You know that sometimes there's just things you need to do alone and to get things done. Or to just take a step back from the world and take a breath before you keep going. Social isolation is when you're alone so regularly that you're being cut off from those social needs that you need. Some people, depending on the person, again, might be able to be alone a lot more often than another person, depending on their individual social needs. While loneliness and social isolation are not the same thing, learning about loneliness and researching about loneliness can help us be informed about social isolation, which is a little bit harder to research because of the slightly more subjective nature of an individual's social needs. That said, according to a report by the Mental Health Foundation, only 22% of people report never feeling lonely, which means that about 78% of people feel lonely at least sometimes. That's a lot of people who feel lonely for at least short periods of times in their life and who may be considered socially isolated. In the same study, 11% of people reported feeling lonely often. And those who were lonely, 42% reported feeling depressed because of their loneliness. While the stats, again, for social isolation and loneliness are not the same thing, it does give us an insight into where those stats could potentially be. And those are really high stats. That's a significant portion of our population that could be considered socially isolated and not getting the social interactions and social capital that they need. And again, you can be strongly affected by those things. We've already mentioned depression as a possible symptom and byproduct of social isolation, but there are many other effects that long-term social isolation can have on a person. So the biggest ones, and the ones we're going to be talking about, are mental health, physical health, and the health of our communities. But So you don't have to listen to me talk the whole time. I'm going to have Zoe take a few minutes and explain some of these effects that social isolation can have on us and our communities. Zoe?
Hi friend, my name is Zoe, and I am so glad that you're here today. Thank you for wanting to know more about the impact of isolation and loneliness on our physical and mental health. And thank you, Sarah, for doing such a great job with this video series and inviting me to take part. It's been a really cool ride so far, and I look forward to seeing the rest. Now, when Sarah asked me to talk about the impact of loneliness and isolation on our physical and mental health, I actually had to pause. Because to me, after doing the research that I've done, those two, physical and mental health, are so inextricably linked that I don't even think of them as separate anymore, particularly when it comes to isolation and loneliness. Now, our culture currently feels like isolation is mostly an emotion, something that we would feel, like happiness or sadness. And they don't always think of loneliness and isolation in the terms of mental health, and even less what it does to our physical health. One of my favorite demonstrations of the link between mental health and physical health is in research done on rejection. So when we're rejected, maybe by a significant other or a friend group or a job or a family, when we're rejected, we feel pain. There is pain that we feel. None of us can deny that. But what we have learned from neuroscience is that the same pain that we feel when we're rejected is the same brain sensors that light up when we were to stub a toe or break an arm or have some kind of physical pain too. So when our brain is telling us that we're in trouble because our body's hurting, those same sensors are lighting up to tell us that we're in trouble because our emotions are hurting. They're the same. Now, why is that? So scientists have researched and speculated that the reason why the same brain receptors light up when we feel physical pain as when we feel emotional pain, is because when we were developing as a species, if we were to leave the pack, that was just as dangerous for us as our health as having a physical injury. Because humans do not survive super great in the wild on their own. They require other humans. We are pack animals for emotional or for physical support. And so when we see the subtle triggers of someone not liking us, or have those hints of body language that we maybe don't belong in this space anymore, we feel those physical receptors of our body saying something's wrong and you need to fix it. Just as if we are straining our muscles too hard at exercising, or we're eating too much. Something is wrong and we need to fix it. Our body is sending us clues. The second piece of research that I think is really interesting is research done on baby animals, so particularly rats and worms. So rats, mammalians like us, and then worms, not mammalians, different types of animals. And what they have found is that if these animals were separated from other animals like them during their development, they were smaller than other animals that grew up with the other animals around them. And what that tells us is that it's not just a matter of mental health. If we are separated from, or emotions, if we are separated from other animals in our species, so other humans, we do not develop as strongly. We see this again in neurology. As we're researching babies' brains and attachment, kids who do not get the emotional or physical attachment of parents at a young age, their brains do not develop in the same way. They do not grow in the same way. But luckily for rats and for nematodes and for humans, if this is remedied later in life with healthy attachment, those things can grow again. Now, Sarah also asked me a question about the impact of known and unknown in isolation. We are not as aware of how isolated we are, but we do know when we feel lonely. So the awareness of isolation is the emotion of loneliness. Loneliness is an emotion, isolation is a state. And what I think we're finding with coronavirus is super interesting to this point. Our culture has been isolated for a very long time. But with coronavirus, with the inability to be around other people, it is only now that we realize how truly isolated we are and we become lonely. I think there are going to be some really beautiful social advances that come out of this pandemic, and I can't wait to see them. Thank you, Sarah, again, for allowing me to participate in this series, and I hope you guys enjoy and learn and are fascinated and a desire to reach out to the people in your lives. Have a great day. Bye.
That was wonderful, Zoe. Thank you. So as she said, social isolation affects us in so many areas of our lives. And because of that, it's important to recognize some key times in life where you're more likely to be socially isolated and are kind of at risk for that. One of the biggest things that can cause you to be socially isolated, especially suddenly, is losing access to your friends and loved ones who you used to go for your meaningful social interactions and who had been your supports for the longest times socially. Times of life where you can see this most clearly is in later in life as elderly or older adults, and when you're just beginning your independent life. So say at the end of high school and college. For those older adults, this is because the supports you used to have in your family especially are a lot more spread out now, and as you get older, the more likely it is that your spouse or friends or people are just gonna die or going to move into nursing homes and away from those older social interactions that you used to have. For those who are just beginning in life, this is often the time where you're going to be moving out on your own and living alone for the first time in your life, which is great, and you're starting a new adventure in life. But that means, especially if your family was your main source of social interaction, that you don't have that to fall back on anymore. And so you're going to need to find new ways to get that type of interaction and social capital. These, of course, would also apply to those who have recently moved and changed locations, changed jobs, any sort of transitional period. And one more group worth mentioning is children. Normally, actually, children aren't as affected as adults by this type of social change. They have school and activities and things built into their lives so that they have regular social interaction, and it amounts a lot more than the average adult. But with transitions and changes in life, which would cause them to lose those social interactions, say you move, say a loved one dies, say your friends move, something like that, the negative consequences for being socially isolated for a child are actually a lot stronger and more prevalent than they are with adults. And so it's important to be aware for the children in your lives because of that. Obviously, we can't just avoid these times in life where we might be socially isolated. A lot of these are very regular life movements and cycles that are good for us in the long term. But it's still important to understand how these things could be affecting us and our loved ones. So in those times where we're less likely to have social interactions, we can stay alert and take steps to maintain our social health. Right now is one of those times, unfortunately. Most of us will go several days or even weeks, if we're doing it right, without seeing each other and seeing people outside of our own household. That can cause a lot of issues for some people, especially with pre-existing conditions or who are a little bit more at risk for social isolation. We have to be very careful right now to get the social interactions that we need, especially ones that don't involve that physical proximity and contact, so that we can stay healthy physically, mentally, and as a society. There's a lot of really great resources out there right now. I know Community Renewal have posted several things on social media, and also some other places have posted many, many good things. And while we will be going more in depth into some ideas and suggestions of how to maintain your own mental and social health now, in the third episode, I'll put some things down in the description of the YouTube video just so you can have that now if you want it. Before I go, I have some things that I'd like to put to you as some things to think about in the next coming weeks, before we next have a video. Just so you can be continuing this conversation as we would a little bit more if we were having an actual workshop. First, think back on a time in your life or a loved one's life where you or your loved one weren't getting the social interactions that you needed. Maybe you felt lonely, maybe you were in a transitional period. And think about those times and see, were you actually socially isolated then or just lonelier than you normally are? And why or why not? What do you think the distinction between that time and maybe a different time of your life is? just kind of thinking through what it means to be socially isolated. Secondly, during those times that you've thought about, either for yourself or your loved one, what was the hardest part of those times? What made being socially isolated difficult? And was there something that made it a lot easier? Maybe a person or something you did where maybe you stepped out of your comfort zone and did something new. And why? Finally, next week we'll be talking about our own social circles and what the average person will need to be healthy socially. So be thinking about the people you interact with on a weekly and even daily basis, and thinking about how those interactions affect you, positively or negatively. I know right now we're not in a normal week, certainly, but I'm sure you can still think of some things and to get your thoughts going about all three of these questions. Thank you so much for joining us for this very different version of the workshop than we had intended. I hope you have a wonderful next couple of weeks and stay healthy. Bye.